Open world games in my eyes typically rely on either a gripping setting or addicting gameplay to truly wow the player. After revisiting other open world games over the course of this year to get myself up to speed of what makes a good, exciting, compelling and fun open world, Sonic Frontiers is just okay. Invigorating. Sonic Frontiers is bold, but it trips up on some steps. It makes vast improvements in some areas and massive regresses in others. It's fun and it's boring. It's the new Marmite of the Sonic franchise. Step aside, Unleashed. Most people will either love it or despise it. I'm not even sure myself. Oh, and for the sake of time, this thing is going to be severely under-edited in comparison to my regular bullshit, so, you know, fair warning. Since Frontiers was revealed, I've been pretty skeptical of the whole open world concept. Pretty sure I even voiced concerns in live streams with others giving their thoughts as well.
Now my only concern is really just the world map layout. That's my only main concern now.
One main concern I've had throughout all of this, though, is the importance of traversal. While Sonic is not a stranger to being in 3D environments, this is the first time in years that he's been given total freedom in a massive sprawling zone. And it's a bit disappointing that the general traversal of the world is slightly lacking that finesse that I was hoping for deep down. The movement Sonic has is really quite fun to mess around with. Chaining smart use of drop dash, boost and aerial dodges can make you zip across the map with ease while feeling like an unstoppable blue train. You can abuse the drop dash to reach areas from a direction not initially intended, launch yourself off of rails to then soar over canyons and crevices for shortcuts, save yourself from certain death in the nick of time, all the while doing tricks in the air to look stylish and earn skill points while you do it. Baseline movement in this game is pretty nuts and a blast, but the problem is more so from the actual actions you do in the zones and the density of the island itself. Sonic being a naturally arcade-like series, putting that into an open world will entirely force the devs to think differently about level and movement design, since the only trace of arcade gameplay can be found in Cyberspace. Cyberspace, we'll get there eventually, but all these islands aside from one feel very devoid of anything really engaging. They're filled with empty fields and rock faces and absolutely desolate pieces of vegetation that give the player nothing of interest or traditional Sonic level appeal. It's not helped that the zone themes are also very basic, and the game does a questionable job of covering up the fact that they split the first island in half to stretch out the time of the game, and because they were underfunded. There are of course little platforming challenges scattered here and there. I personally enjoyed climbing to the top of this enormous ruin as a display of your platforming expertise. Some memory tokens seemingly flowed very nicely into each other, and rails, like lots and lots and lots and lots of rails. But after you've spent your first initial few hours in the game, you've pretty much already seen there is to offer, and that dreaded sense of repetition slowly started creeping in around the later half of Chaos Island. None of the islands really have any platforming challenges or visual set pieces that differentiate each other too much. All of them have balloons to pop, rails to do loops with, dash pads and ring launchers. Nothing unique to one zone in particular aside from a brief momentary aesthetic piece rather than an actual mechanic, and that's it. This is all exemplified by the general gameplay loop too. You collect items by doing different specific challenges across the map to collect emeralds, then do the boss fights. That's it. Each challenge only serves its purpose, and the open world, instead of being intriguing and unpredictable, is very boring and only serves as a reason to go from waypoint to waypoint. There's just nothing here. Now, Sega and Sonic Team were definitely aware that this was a little too empty, as it's explained several times in promos and in the story itself that these islands have been long since abandoned and any trace of life has devolved into little cocos that live out the lives of their creators. But this has me wondering though if this was truly the intention or if it was just a way to justify why the open world isn't as developed as it really should be. To add insult to injury, I wasn't overly chuffed when I also found out that fast travel would be an option. In fact, once I unlocked it in game, I said out loud, oh no. I'm of the belief that fast travel can kill the experience of an open world game faster than Activision's reputation. Some can definitely benefit from fast travel, like in Far Cry where it lets you get much closer to the action faster to avoid the problem I've already outlined, and GTA could use a fast travel so that not every other slice of gameplay is another fucking car chase. But for most open worlds, fast travel makes people not want to explore the world fully when they can just press a button and you're at where you want to be, which is unideal when this should be a game where you want to traverse the world and its platforming challenges instead. I mean, for goodness sake, you can teleport to a cyberspace stage at any time that you haven't interacted with yet. In a game about a platforming mascot, putting this feature in mixed with an uninteresting open zone is a recipe for quick boredom if the player isn't interested for long enough, as it started wearing off on me 2/3 of the way through. Except for Ares. Ares had a par level of variety, and it has Knuckles on it, so easily the best island. This is the first time the studio has made anything this grand scale for each level though, so I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'm hoping that when we return to more urban and industrial set pieces, we can get much more out of the level design there from more vertically varied buildings and set pieces. And also, since I didn't know where else to put this, while movement is really flexible in this game, it has a layer of jank to it. To stop the player from launching off of every surface, they made it so you're glued to the ground, which makes sense so that you don't die every 5 seconds, but more often than not it creates weird interactions with props in the world and can really mess up your aerial movements if you're not careful. Hell, even a few side quests would have helped massively in bolstering Frontiers' general gameplay loop. As I've said earlier, in Frontiers you collect tokens so you can collect keys so that you can get emeralds, rinse and repeat for 4 whole islands, with at times monotonous quote-unquote puzzles used to unlock the map. It gets boring fast. But I do think there's a way to make the world just a little bit more interesting. There's an overarching narrative of the Cocos fulfilling their fates and finding peace for doing so. So why not in some of the built-up areas could you have some NPC Cocos where you help them doing various tasks to learn more than just the basics of war life around the Starfall Islands? For fuck's sake, every open world game ever made has had side quests. It's an easy and effective way to make even games that are meant to feel desolate like Fallout show at least a little slither of life. Unleashed did this 14 years ago. Why couldn't we have gotten that as well as the side stories that for some reason count towards 100% completion? Just add things into this zone to at least make it feel more alive if it's not as engaging as it should be. Just not like this. I'm giving this game a pretty bad rap so far, but there is one gameplay mechanic that I do like. I like it a lot, like goddamn. Combat in Sonic Frontiers is definitely one of its strengths. While not as in-depth as, say, Devil May Cry, it can really feel satisfying to use your whole moveset to piss on an unsuspecting robot with childbearing hips. You've got moves for sustain, recovery, finishes, even a side loop on the go where you can immediately stun an enemy again to keep them from recovering. At its most basic, combat can be pretty vicious, but there are problems. Again. Yeah, this will be a running theme, you'll notice. Because while the fighting is great, it's easy for it to become spammable. There's no sort of mechanic to encourage people to shake things up. No extra skill points or seeds, no damage fall off from repeating moves, no cooldown for more powerful attacks. There isn't even a score system really in this game which devalues weaker attacks. I played around with my combos because I wanted to experiment and look flashy, but without a way to deter it, people will fall into repetitive patterns in fights of using only the most powerful and safest moves and quickly becoming bored with this combat system, which is a shame since it's really aesthetically pleasing. If you wanted to, you could win just by spamming the basic attack, just throw in a couple parries every now and again and you're at no risk. However, this only really applies to the Guardians scattered across the map, as while each island has nothing different in the level design, they do have differences in enemy design. Some require stomps, others require side loops, some need to be homing attacked up to. You can even use some as hang gliders akin to Breath of the Wild. And also, the Titan fights. These are unnecessarily fantastic fights that just scream flashiness and style. Except the final boss, like what the fuck was that? I will say that combat is generally better than what it was back in 2008. Hey! Hey, fuck you, hang on. Here we go, boing, 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 boing. But with that being said, it did give you 2 different ways of starting combos as opposed to Frontiers' one. I can kind of understand why, as Frontiers has to balance focus on both movement options and combat options, while the Werehog only had to worry about combat. But a simple fix to something insanely good like the Sonic Boom would be for its initial first kicks to be the most powerful, then for the damage to gradually decrease the longer you use it. Same goes for the regular combo to deter people from being boring fucks. Like maybe implementing a similar system in Smash where doing the same move over and over again will gradually decrease the amount of damage it does. That's really the only major problem I have with combat, since it can feel somewhat easy at times because of these powerful moves, especially considering that leveling up your skill tree is way too easy, and the counter gives you a very generous window of opportunity since it auto counters for you so long as you're holding the button to do so. Maybe tone it all down just a bit. By a ton, yeah, by a little bit. There's an argument to be made though about the cinematic appeal of being this walking death machine, and yeah, I guess. But it can feel at times like putting Virgil in the kiddie pool or Bayonetta into a game like Oh, combat though, if you're willing to give it a go, is generally pretty good overall, so not much to say. Except fuck Elder Coco and his leveling up system.
They're going to assault the bunker!
Oh, he made the reference! Now would probably be a good time to bring up the writing and overall tone beats Frontiers takes on. This won't be nearly as long though, since I'm not as focused on the story aspect when it comes to these games, probably why I never got into the whole Black Knight craze that happened on Twitter, God rest its soul, but I think the writing is fine. Mostly. It's an undeniable step up from Blue's Clues we got 5 years ago, and the story puts more emphasis on the characters and them reconciling with themselves and their flaws. I like it. You can tell Ian Flynn is definitely trying to humanise them once again to what they were. Amy's progressed from this obsessive fangirl to a more overall passion-fueled character with a much more subtle way of showing her crush that isn't forceful marriage. Knuckles is now battling with himself over whether he feels for whether he should continue his duty of being a guardian or explore his love for adventuring, a theme I don't think has been explored before with him. Very nice. Tails? Okay, Tails felt more like it was damage control for the bastardization he endured in the 2010s. His focus is him feeling inadequate and worthless in Sonic's shadow, drawing ties to how he feels guilt for what happened in the events of Forces, ergo, that's Ian Flynn giving Pontank and Graf the finger, culminating to him going his own way and going solo. I know there are people that take issue with how his poor writing during that era has now been reinforced by Ian trying to tie it into his arc in the game, which I can understand, but I'm really not that bothered by it. At the end of the day, Tails is still meant to be the kid underdog. Sometimes shit happens, people slip back into old habits. As Sonic says in game, he's still growing up. So I mean, it works for me, but I don't really blame anyone for not being on board with it. The general tone of all these characters' interactions though are probably the best they've ever been. It sounded off at first since the voices are less animated and cheery than usual, but damn, by the late game did it feel more natural and engaging. Sage was serviceable enough to work as a villain turned ally. You get to see her slowly long for connection and a want to feel alive. She's okay, and if the post-credits are anything to go by, this won't be the last time we see her. Although I will say that her little humming song was... I laughed at it. I'm sorry, it was just Sage talking to Eggman. I couldn't. Speaking of Eggman, not much has changed. He's still the man that acts on impulse instead of thought. He's carrying over his fatherly characteristics from IDW into Sage, but the real performance shines in these tucked away recorders that give lore, ego, and his thoughts on each character in the game because he has a superiority complex like that. Characters overall are fairly decent, but the story itself isn't nearly as in-depth. A majority of the story is more of a history lesson in the lore of the islands and the ancients in an attempt to repair the inconsistency of the entire series' lore and tie everything together. But one of the more pressing matters is that Frontiers has some...
So, that was a thing.
Marvelisms? The dialogue was fine, but there were a few times where you'd hear...
Those sure are words you said just now.
Spout out this fucking annoying little shit. And another Marvel symptom being that they reference a lot of their older games. Like, Jesus, if it was just the passing comments while you're roaming around the open world, I would be fine with it. But no, they shove the references directly into the story and canonize Boom. A common complaint of the IDW comics was how much they shoehorn in references, particularly to the adventure era, especially in the recent Surgeon Kit saga. And I'm now starting to see where that concern was coming from because there are a lot of these moments in the game where it feels overbearing. They show clips from previous games like... Okay, I get it. It works for fans, but it doesn't work for people that haven't played many of these games before. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say, really, other than look at the animation! The animations and art, dude, oh, it's a mixed bag. Animations during scripted cutscenes are a lot more appealing and fluid than they have been in several years. They're not perfect, but goddammit, the animation is begging me to give this game another chance. However, just because the cutscenes are nicely done, or should I say, are better than past games, when outside of cutscenes, animations are a bit more mixed. Again, I mean, tricks do look a bit weird and they're not as defined as Generations. Big's fishing minigame has a solid array of poses and movements which I enjoyed. The movement oftentimes looked janky since Sonic was glued to the ground and creates some odd interactions with the world. And then the bosses. Unnecessarily raw. So, like I said, mixed bag. Now, for the art direction itself, I know I said I was turning around to like it a month or two ago because I assumed they would evolve the worlds more than the surface. They did not do that. The general art of the world unfortunately does feel more basic and at some points just didn't feel tonally correct. Pretty sure I pointed this out earlier though, with how there are no landmarks, not enough variation, just stale. There were glimmers of light here and there. Discovering a secret passageway with tiny seams of light cracking through the sand on Ares Island felt akin to the world building of Unleash, and it was legitimately exciting to find a new pathway where a lot of other people may not have found it. But it's only in very short bursts where it did feel like a Sonic world, mainly only in Cyberspace, which is a shame. I'm running out of energy here, I want to wrap this up quickly.
It's time for the quick-fire round!
The final boss was stupid. It felt like the plot started falling off and the fight itself was one of these mini-games from earlier in the game. What? But at the same time, having every boss fight be a similar spectacle makes it hard to one-up with them, because when everything's a spectacle, nothing is. Cyberspace stages were surprisingly not too bad. The controls in the stages felt awkward at times, but the skips you can do make these stages really enjoyable to speedrun through, offering that classic arcade gameplay in a way I didn't expect. But my god, stop putting previous levels in. No more Chemical Plant, no more Sky Sanctuary, definitely no more Green Hill. Even Speed Highway, no more Nostalgia Bait, please, for the love of God. Big's Fishing is a lot more surface level and easy, making it a bit boring if done for too long, but fishing is always intended to be a place to cool off, and I love the fact that you can beat the game doing nothing but fishing minigames. That is incredible. The fourth island was a decent detour from the regular gameplay loop and was a good test for the player, but it was very unclear where the hell you were meant to go, and homing attack could often fail on you, which ended up making this island more annoying in the middle than it really should have been. The art book includes some really great concept art, and I'm glad to see these things return because I always love spending time looking at artwork behind games. But that also meant I saw what could have been instead of what we got. Like, dude, look at this goddamn Chaos Island, aka the worst island, has too many segments that take control away from the player and shoves you into a 2D segment that I didn't even want to go in. Please don't do that to my fragile mind again.
Fuck this guy.
And that's it. I think that covers everything. Footnote. So, there is DLC coming out throughout the span of 2023 that does seem to improve upon some of the core complaints I have right now, including, but not limited to, new cosmetics, game modes, open zone challenges, thank god, playable characters, that's pretty big, a whole new story, most likely one for Sage, similar to episode Shadow Enforcers, and it's all free. So, okay, it's not accurate. It's not entirely accurate to my feelings now anymore, because now I've probably bumped the game up to an 8 now that these quality of life changes are coming, but still, why did I have to wait to DLC, man? Come on. I didn't hate Frontiers, and it is fun in parts, but after beating it, I felt a wave of disappointment. It has some really great moments in there that can push the series forward, but for now what we got was a very barren open world that felt repetitive a lot of the time, with occasional highlights of combat and traversal. Instead of reviewing this as a Sonic game, I wanted to take the approach of reviewing this as an open world game and comparing it to other experiences I had. And I really think the killer for me was a lack of creativity. There's just not enough meat on this game's bones for me to be as hyped about it as so many others are. At its best, Sonic Frontiers is a bold step forward into a new era that will try its best to unify and evolve, but at its worst it's a cheese fest of tedious and janky gameplay that could have been fixed with one little tweak to each component. For everything Frontiers did right, it did something else wrong, and I just wanted more. And I don't want to come off as that one guy that just wants others to dislike the game as well. I'm really happy that so many people are having a great time with this game, and it seems like a majority of the world is finally opening up and letting Sonic be back in the mainstream light again. But what I'd like to request is that we get something better in the future. We could get so much more out of this formula than what we've got now, and I tried to outline some of my ideas earlier, and I want to see it, but we can't do that if we don't voice our concerns clearly. The devs are listening. They've stated they're wanting to hear serious feedback. This game is a good first step in the right direction, but that's all it is. A first step. Oh, and one last request. Sega, fund Sonic Team properly. If the rumours are true, then only 60 people made this game, were underfunded, were forced into work in crunch time, and had to beg for another year of development so that it could actually be playable. It's a miracle this game came out as good as it did, so God, oh my God, please just give the devs enough breathing room and a chance to make something that the wider gaming audience can finally recognise as an all-around great game. So, I give Sonic Frontiers a 7 out of 10. And a raised glass to Sonic's future, hoping this can be built on from here.
And more.
But hey, at least the music's good.